Good evening, everyone. Again, I do want to thank you all for taking time out of your very busy day to join us in the Southeast Guiding Coalition. As you know, your input is of value to us. And again, this is phase two of our Southeast Guiding Coalition meetings. 2 weeks ago, we met for the first time in the fall to continue our listening phase of this process. Again, I am Esther Omogwayne. For those of you who do not know me, I am the Regional Superintendent over Elementary Schools, Portland Public Schools. And as is consistent with our practice at PPS, I'd like to extend our warmest welcome to our board members and our board of directors, Flow Analytics, Karina and Brick Architectural Firm, both partners in this process, our principals and members of our Southeast Guiding Coalition team. Can I get any volunteers to please read, any volunteer rather, to please read the land acknowledgement and anti-oppression statement? If you'd like to read it, just raise your hand or go ahead and just start. Any volunteers from our audience?
Looks like Leah.
I'm going to try this, but I'm hoping that mogs are cooperative tonight. So I'll read it as best as I can. Thank you for making it a bit bigger. At PPS, we strive to strengthen our relationships with the Native community and Native nations. A symbol of this commitment is the land acknowledgement. These statements bring visibility to the first peoples of our collective home. This statement is meant to provide information and context while also encouraging all of us to reflect on our current day relationships with Native people and Native experiences. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of the Chinook, Clackamas, Kalapua, Multnomah, Wasco, Kathlem, Tualatin, Molalla. We also know that many other tribes made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We honor their history and acknowledge the sacrifices they made. Let us acknowledge the robust present-day federally recognized tribes of the area, the Grand Ronde, Siletz, Cowlitz. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the Chinook Nation, who has been seeking federal recognition for many years. The urban Indian community is made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country, representing 400 tribes. The urban Indian community has a vivid history made up of people whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking more opportunities. Oh, thank you. Today, these tribes and communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that would be greatly admired by their ancestors. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve students and families representing more than 150 tribal nations within our education system. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization of our students, all students today, and make visible the multitude of Native families that many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. We encourage every person to reflect on their own history, understand the history of colonization and genocide, and support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. This acknowledgement is one step that we can take to improve our support of Indigenous communities in the area. In addition to acknowledging the land and those that have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa, whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within the white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to the stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can begin to heal.
Thank you very much, Leah Dickey. So in continuation of the work that we started tonight, we will engage in our listening session. We'll introduce candidates who have volunteered to serve as co-chairs. We'll also briefly go over the co-chair roles and responsibilities and share information from the listening and learning report. We will break up into smaller groups to increase the opportunity to have every voice heard, then reconvene at the at the end for whole group share, highlights from our discussion, and state next steps for in the presentation. Again, all principals are welcome to participate. However, in an effort to recognize the needs of every stakeholder group, including our principals, our Southeast Guiding Coalition principals have elected to work through volunteers they selected. The principal reps will share the information gleaned from the meeting with their colleagues at a different forum. They will also take information from the principals back to the larger group of Southeast Guiding Coalition team. We have also BRIC facilitators joining us tonight. BRIC, again, is a community-focused architectural firm that works alongside students, educators, and other long-range facilities planned to include BIPOC stakeholders in their process of decision-making. It is the reason we have them engaged in this activity with us. Because we value the input from all stakeholders, Southeast Guiding Coalition has elected to create a co-chair role. This role is totally voluntary, and the idea is that it would help bridge the gap between members in a variety of ways. Our co-chair volunteers are Adriel Person, and Beth Kavanaugh. I'll have them introduce themselves in a minute. The roles and the responsibilities of the co-chairs are: they orient our new members to the Southeast Guiding Coalition process, they inform overall planning, and they represent our Southeast Guiding Coalition to the board. Will Adriel Person and Beth Kavanaugh please say a few words to let members know how they can best reach you to discuss ideas and concerns? So is Adriel Person around?
Hi, my name is Adriel Person. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. I am a mother. I'm an advocate, a student advocate. I am a person who grew up a native of Portland. And when I was invited to be a part of this process, I thought that it would be a great opportunity to lend a voice to a minimally heard group of people, but also to learn about the processes for PPS and how the decisions are made. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Adriel Person. We look forward to working alongside you as we shape the plans and ideas that govern this process. Will Beth Kavanaugh please say a few words as well?
Hi there, I'm Beth Kavanaugh, and I'm the parent of 2 Hosford Middle School students this year in the neighborhood program, a 6th and an 8th grader. I got involved with the enrollment balancing process several years ago when I was a parent representative on the DBRAC committee prior to the opening of Tubman and Roseway Heights Middle Schools. And I'm kind of in this position where I really want to see this through. I got involved because of Southeast Portland. I live in Southeast Portland, and really feel compelled to find a solution that really works for our region. In terms of getting in touch with me, I don't know. My email is I'm pretty responsive on just my personal email. So that's something that I can share with the group at some point. And then I don't know are we continuing to use, I don't know if whatever, we can talk about communication methods later, but anyway, I'm happy to answer questions about what I've seen throughout this process and how we're moving forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Adriel Person and Beth Kavanaugh. Truly appreciate your presence and your willingness to work alongside us as we shape our schools for the future. As a reminder, our Phase 2 charge will complete the middle grades transformation that started in Phase 1, centered on the conversion of Harrison Park from a K-8 school to a middle school, and at the same time increasing the enrollment at Lane Middle School. The charge also will address as many K-5 issues as Southeast Guiding Coalition creates a new home for Harrison Park K-5 students while aligning elementary school boundaries and special programs with middle school changes. The goal of this whole session is to have recommendations to the Deputy Superintendent and hopefully to the board soon after that, tentatively in January. Our goal is to end phase 2 meetings in January and have a decision made. That said, I would like to turn the presentation over to Karina, a member of our team.
Thank you, Dr. O. So as we do at the beginning of every meeting, we want to check in with everyone relative to the group agreements. So we have 5, at least to start here, right? That we want folks to stay engaged in the conversation, to speak your truth responsibly, and really just listen to understand and to believe, to take people at their word. And recognize that there are going to be things that call on you to do things and to think differently and experience some discomfort. And it's okay to sit in that discomfort. And then last but certainly not least, as we go through this process, especially as we're working our way through these meetings, to expect and accept non-closure, right? So I think it's going to be important for us as we process through these that as we're walking along the journey of creating these scenarios, we're going to expect that at the end of every meeting, we're not going to have every solution figured out, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge those and also to see if there's anything else you personally need from this group, from each other, from each of us to be successful. So I want to open it up, and if there is something, you can either raise your hand or just open your mic and let us know if there's any other group agreement you would like us to add before we kind of go into the check-in, which will allow us to kind of dig into this a little bit further. Not seeing any hands. Okay. Well, we will give you an opportunity here shortly to go ahead and think about this a little bit more as part of your check-in. So Marnie's going to walk us through kind of what this check-in process is going to look like, what our question is going to be, and then distribute us to breakout rooms.
Hello, I'm Marnie Makowski. We always like to have a check-in to sort of get all of our voices in the room. When there's this many people, we do this check-in in duos, and it serves the same purpose. It also is a way for you to build your community and get to know each other. So this time, we're going to give you about 10 minutes altogether. So manage your time. Know if there's one room that has 3 people, everyone else is just duos. You should have 5 minutes each. And just say what your name is, what your connection to the district is, and which of those agreements that we just went over, we'll put them in the chat. Which of those really stand out to you today? What is something that you'll hold on to that will make our conversations go a little easier? So let's make sure we have those in the chat. The chat will go with you, it won't come back with you. You have everything in there, great. Okay, so I'm gonna send you off. You'll automatically go into breakout rooms. Have fun, get to know each other, listen well, and then we'll pull you back in just about 10 minutes. Off you go.
Hopefully you got a chance to get to know someone new, have a little chat about some of these group agreements. Now that you've had a chance to kind of talk in your groups, thank you. Now that you've had a chance to talk in your small duos, or is there any other feedback or additions to the group agreements that you all talked about that would be of benefit to us moving forward? Anyone can, oh yeah, Elizabeth, you've got your hand up. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay. So I was just asking Joe this question as we got shut down, but can someone talk a little bit about the different roles of people on the committee? So there's about 50% PPS staff, I think, and like there's parents, and is there, especially, is there a distinction in, you know, what staff are expected to show up and present and what you're asking for us as parents? And can anyone speak to that?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see. I guess I'll start, and how about folks at PPS, Judy, Claire, let me know if I'm speaking out of turn. But I think the main purpose, at least, so there are a number of kind of groups, right? We've got a listening and learning group. We've got the Southeast Guiding Coalition. We've got principals at the potentially impacted school. And the goal of this group is to really foreground, if you will, the voices of the Southeast Guiding Coalition members, meaning community members that are part of Southeast Guiding Coalition. There are a variety of district staff here, as you pointed out, not just sort of central administrations, but area senior directors. We've got principals, and their roles primarily are to listen and to act as resources if there are questions relative to their particular schools or their particular areas, and then to also be liaisons between this group and those folks that are actually creating the scenarios to bring back to this group. At least that's the way that it was pitched to me. Anyone at PPS want to, Claire, give me a thumbs up if you think that's about right.
That is correct. And there are other people like myself, Deputy Superintendent of Business and Operations. My role is I'm the executive sponsor of this process. And then once the Southeast Guiding Coalition makes a recommendation, then I take that to the board for them to, we'll take it, we're going to actually meet with them 3 times during the process and give them updates. But then in the end, when the Southeast Guiding Coalition prepares its proposal, then I take that to the board meeting. I would bring the co-chairs with me to help deliver that, as well as we have a community staff, community engagement director, Shanice Clark, is here as well. And Dr. O then is just our voice of our school leaders and a district representative, as she works with so many of the school leaders in this area. So different central office staff have different roles. And then Judy Brennan is Director of Enrollment and Transfer, and she brings in expertise in terms of historical processes in this district, as well as working very closely with our more technical consultants through flow analytics. So I'm hoping that helps. And then we have some support staff here that are doing all the back of the room, keeping things running when you're running a virtual meeting.
Yeah, I think
hopefully that helps.
That was great. Thank you. And of course, we've got board members here who are, as Director Brim Edwards just talked earlier, are really here in listening mode, right? They want to be engaged in this process and hear from you all about what you have to say. And Judy, if you open up your chat, Judy just put the Southeast Guiding Coalition charter in there, which further lays out kind of the role of you all as Southeast Guiding Coalition members. Elizabeth, did that answer your question? Or do you have, looks like thumbs up. Okay. Anyone else have any modifications, additions, tweaks, good conversation around the group agreements that you want to share? Did you just have some good conversations, which is okay as well? Okay. Not seeing any hands come up. So why don't we launch into it? Marnie, will you share your screen? Oh, look at you. You're reading my mind. So we have a good amount of kind of, I want to say, different levels of data to share with you tonight. And we want to spend some time as we process that data together to really start to talk about what the potential impacts could be, right? And so partly we wanted to start that by bringing back to you all the work that we did together at our last meeting on the 23rd of September. So if you'll pan, one of the things that we asked you when we were together, sorry, no, we're going to go to the next slide, which has the Southeast Guiding Coalition notes on it. It is the last one in that line. Yep. So one of the things that we asked you all to think about when we were in our breakout groups last time, our 3 breakout groups, was kind of what are your hopes and aspirations for the process, right? And so you can see here on the screen, that really, as we started thinking about this, some of the key elements was that we wanted to be sure that we're not looking at quick fixes, that we're thinking about this in the long term, right? And that there is kind of a district-wide goal, or at least a goal of the Southeast Guiding Coalition to really increase the demographic diversity at the affected schools, kind of both at the middle school level and at the elementary school level, and that should be a part of the charge of this group. That in addition to that, or kind of partnered with that, there was a recognition about the importance of representation for BIPOC communities, and so that that means that there are sort of requirements, if you will, or charges to recruit and retain BIPOC teachers, administrators, and staff, so that BIPOC community members and students can see themselves reflected in those that are sort of managing the buildings and leading their education. This desire to kind of balance and provide equitable opportunities for students across all levels, right? That I think everyone from pre-K all the way through high school wants to ensure that your zip code doesn't necessarily dictate the educational experience you have, but rather it really is about creating an equitable distribution of those. Promote culturally centered schools, right? To ensure that everyone feels welcome, seen, heard, celebrated as part of that, not only for students and staff, but for families, and especially and including the immigrant communities. And that as we think about, those opportunities, the programmatic opportunities, kind of keeping a focus on hands-on teaching and learning practices, project-based learning, to ensure that we're preparing our kids, not just for high school, but for life beyond high school. And that when we talk about supporting the sort of educational needs of children, we aren't just talking about their academic needs, but we are also talking about their physical and social-emotional needs as we go through that process. So that was a key component, so that every student arrives to school ready to learn. So those are kind of the hopes and aspirations that you all shared with us last time. Okay. Yeah, and then the good news is your doubts and fears were much less, or at least we didn't get enough time to talk to them. But I'm gonna say it's because people are coming into this with more hopes and aspirations, and I hope that continues, right? But I think that the doubts and the fears are real, and they're big, right? That I'm going to start at the bottom, because this one came through quite a bit, that the loud voices will threaten to derail the work of this group, right? That through our process, that we need to maintain sort of a fidelity to mission to ensure that our BIPOC students and families don't feel devalued, don't feel excluded, and don't feel, they do feel like we have a good sense of accountability to the work that we're doing, right? And a recognition that the biggest fear is that we place additional burdens on the families that are already impacted the most by educational inequity, societal inequity. And so those were the key takeaways from the group, the 3 working groups that we had from our SCGC meeting last time. Does anyone have any questions or any feedback on that before we start processing other data that we heard?
I have feedback on the first bullet point. I unfortunately received some feedback from a BIPOC family at Arleta School this week that they had signed up for a BIPOC listening session, and were told the day before the day of the session that only one other family had signed up, and that the session was being canceled, and that they were invited to participate in the general session. And they felt extremely devalued and excluded by that. And they felt that when they were at the general session, that it was dominated by the white families, and that they didn't feel comfortable speaking. And they wondered why PPS didn't value the 2 families that had signed up for the BIPOC session enough to continue with the session.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. I will say that we didn't host any sessions that were not BIPOC. So the general session was still BIPOC, a BIPOC session. It was just not geared specifically to Lane or middle school or Harrison Park. So the Arleta family was actually intentionally supposed to be part of the other impacted schools that were part of that was the right category for them, if you will. But they were all BIPOC sessions.
I can only convey what they conveyed to me.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I apologize that they felt devalued in that process. Anyone else? Okay.
I would say, hey, sorry.
Yeah,
This
go
is
ahead,
Josh. Given the the comment about the sessions being canceled, is there any insight into how many, like what the sample size is behind some of these sentiments? Just to make sure that we're
that's a
being analytical.
Segue, actually, yeah. We're about to get right into that. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to get to the listening and learning, and when we do that, Josh, we're going to talk about kind of what that process looked like, and then we'll share with you the feedback from that. But prior to that, kind of to set the stage, Jed from Flow Analytics is going to share with us the results of a survey that they did over the summer with 5th grade families. And so I believe, Jed, you're going to take over screen share. And
yeah, I can just go ahead and just speak to the room for a minute here, and then I'll go ahead and just share some information from the document. So, yeah, we did through a contractor of Flows some follow-on surveys to a set of 2020 middle grade surveys, phone surveys that were done as part of last time's process. And what we did here was extend this to survey 5th grade households at elementary schools that were added to the process this fall. And so those included Abernathy, Glencoe, Grout, Kelly, Lewis, Whitman, and Woodmere. And this year, amongst those group of schools, we're able to complete 202 surveys, which is compared to 335 surveys last year for a little bit bigger group of schools. And so the reason that this was commissioned this year was to provide a consistent quantitative set of survey information across all the schools in the process. And so what has gone out is a couple of documents. One is a summary and one is a full report with verbatim comments. And so those are with the meeting materials. And I just want to point out that last year's survey is on the enrollment and program balancing webpage for folks that didn't see that already. And so with this year's survey, we heard from roughly half of the BIPOC households that were in these schools that had provided phone numbers. And so those results, they really reinforced what we heard from this guiding coalition last year, which is to perform targeted listening and learning sessions with BIPOC families. And Karina is going to talk in more detail about that next. But I just wanted to share some quick highlights from this year's phone survey. And I think, overall BIPOC and white households, they're on the same page about many things, like quality of schools and teachers, proximity to schools, and safety. But there were a couple notable areas where there is some difference there, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up the document here so folks can see how I navigate this. So you should be able to see that now. So one of the notable areas where we saw some difference between white and BIPOC families as far as their awareness or preferences was first just about knowledge of this process and the Southeast Guiding Coalition. There was, as you can see here, kind of low awareness in general, but we did see that there's a bit more awareness amongst the white households about this process going on. And then you can also, so this is the full report. You can see the tables in this way. You can also see more graphics that show that. Again, this really highlights that there's not a lot of overall awareness of the process. And the colors that you see here are the race and ethnicity breakouts for those different bars there. And another thing I just want to point out was there are some differences in preference around a couple of things like small class sizes and siblings being able to attend the same school. That tended to be a bit more important to BIPOC families than white families in this survey. So I'm just going to jump down to the full results of the question about the importance of small class size. And I just like to look at the averages, which have a grade score along with them. And you can see that the columns across the top here are races and ethnicity. And you can see here the level of importance here from A down to F. And you see that ranks slightly higher for our Black, Latino, and Pacific Islander families that were surveyed as a part of this relative to white families. And then finally here, I just wanted to share that there are verbatim responses to this. So while it's not necessarily as in-depth as BRICS listening and learning, it could be something that may provide additional perspective to folks here. So I'm just scrolling down to further in this document where respondents are answering the question about when you're considering the whole picture, what is the most important thing for PPS to consider throughout this process? And you can see here, there's a number of responses from Black households, from Grout, Kelly, and then you can scroll further down and see some additional responses there. So wanted to share that resource for folks. If you do have questions about how this survey was designed, we can certainly connect you with the folks that we worked on to actually make this happen. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Karina.
Thank you. Any questions just overall for Jed on the data that he just presented? You can raise your hand or just open your mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Director Hollis.
I just had a question about the awareness piece. Can you kind of go over that a little bit as far as, was there high awareness for communities of color or was it low awareness of this process with communities of color?
Yeah, Gary, so it was generally low awareness across the board, but we did see, for instance, with, if we take Black households, 17% were aware of this process. Latino households, 36% were aware of the process. So fairly low numbers here for those pieces. And again, if you look in the document, you can see that full breakout by race and ethnicity for those questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else have any questions about the 5th grade summer phone survey? Okay, so yes, Barney, will you take us back to the presentation? So what we want to do is talk a little bit about the listening and learning report. Before we get into the specifics of what we heard, we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we had in doing that survey, to get to your question that you asked earlier, Josh, right? So I will 15 affinity-based sessions. Obviously, you remember the flyer that we shared last time. And there were some where we got 0 participants. Like there were people that signed up and we waited half an hour and no one showed up. There were some that, like I said earlier, that people had signed up for the wrong session, so we had to move them to other sessions. But you know, as we were kind of hearing feedback from schools, partly it was that just in general, almost all communities, but most the families that are most impacted are stretched thin, and I will say Zoom fatigued, right? And so there was a feeling, and I think Principal Dickey's on the call, especially with the Harrison Park community, that potentially we would get better response if we had been in person, right? There were some communities that would have felt better being in person. But then right at that same time, actually at Harrison Park, you know, there were COVID outbreaks, right? And so in-person meetings were just not safe and advisable to have. So the district did not want to create any super spreader events, right, in those communities. And so just in the Harrison Park community. I will say that another thing that we heard as part of this process is that the BIPOC community, communities, especially around Southeast, are distrustful of the process, right? And so there was a reluctance on folks to participate. And so partly what we're going to do is, as we think through this, to have an opportunity later on in the process to really review some strategies to address this. We've started to think through what that can look like and be able to think through that process. So to answer your question, Josh, you know, I would say that we were under 50 in terms of all of the folks that attended all of the sessions. There was I think our largest group was the dual language group. And then some of the BIPOC sessions around both Harrison Park and Lane and the creative science session were kind of our next largest session. Okay. Any questions about kind of that or processing that you want to do before we get into some of the specifics? So I guess what I will say is what we're going to present tonight is a clean recording, if you will, a reporting of what we heard, right? With a recognition that this didn't come from a wide sample size, but the impact, the passion, the energy, the experiences of the folks that were sharing very vulnerably of their ideas are still have impact, right? Any questions before then I go on to present what we heard? Okay, and we'll get a chance to process this information together in our breakout, in our first breakout. So Marnie, will you take us to the key themes? Yeah, so some of what we heard was that schools should offer culturally dynamic, you know, we talked a lot around kind of culturally responsive, and people were, you know, there's this idea that it shouldn't even be a response, it should just be dynamic from the start, right? Curriculum and activities that are reflective of the student bodies in all of our schools, right? And all of the student body, all of the students in our schools. And that I think there was a strong feeling, it came across not just from Harrison Park families, but from other families recognizing at Harrison Park the richness of experience and perspectives offered by the diversity at Harrison Park. And really looking at that as one of the, what I would say the sort of most attractive elements about that school, right? We had parents from parents from Lewis that specifically talked about that they really wanted that experience for their child, right? And feel as though having that, our goal that we stated in our group of having kind of diversity represented across all of our schools was very important. Similar to you, the other key piece that came out of this is that there should be kind of an equitable distribution of programs among all the neighborhood schools, across all schools actually. Where you live should not dictate your child's educational experience, right? And primarily when people were talking about kind of the richness of communities that are diverse, there was this, and even in schools that don't have that level of diversity, a key theme that kind of kept coming back was this idea that authentic interpersonal connections between students themselves, between students and families, between staff and students, and between staff themselves, kind of all of those different sort of dimensions of interpersonal relationships were really important, right? As people were talking about, even recognizing in the case of Harrison Park, which is where I remember hearing this specifically, that recognition that, as schools get I will say, as school enrollment and programming opportunities shift, that I hope that the families that are already together can stay together. That was a big sort of driver. If we can move whole blocks of kids rather than splitting everybody up, that would be an ideal. I think the other thing that probably has less to do with where you go to school, but this idea of the presence of language liaisons or community liaisons to connect BIPOC folks and communities in historically marginalized communities is critical, right? That was clearly heard and really appreciated by communities. They felt like that was a clear way of sending a message that they were valued, that they were seen, that they were heard. Next. They also talked about, that safety isn't just physical, right? That there are socio-emotional aspects to feeling safe and feeling supported in a important way, and wanting to ensure that, again, those resources that allow for greater social-emotional supports were well distributed and equitably distributed. And so that talked about, again, if we're wanting to create kind of some of this differentiated instruction or create, this level of support and kind of distribution of resources, that breeds with it needing to have what we call FTE, full-time equivalents, or staff, right? And so that is kind of the crux of what we're getting at here, is that there's a balance between wanting to create kind of enough critical mass at every school such that those resources are available, but also wanting those schools to still feel like really diverse communities and be in their neighborhoods. Again, a different way of saying kind of the same thing that we heard earlier, their privilege should not drive access to programs, right? That we heard very clearly about some of the barriers to accessing programs, right? The transportation, the need to have different levels of family taking care of children that don't have ready access to transportation, or the need to work multiple jobs and having siblings kind of taking care of kids, and all of that was very real, and that it disproportionately impacted BIPOC and historically underserved communities. And then we heard, one of the questions, because one of the tensions in this exercise, as I was talking about earlier, is this tension of creating neighborhood schools that are where folks are connected and proximate, meaning have close ties to their schools, was very important. And then on the other side, this desire that everyone shares of having kind of robust, deeply engaging, and plentiful opportunities at every school was also important. And so as we were talking to people about that tension, what we heard loud and clear was, don't make us choose. We should not have to choose, right? That we should have access to both. And so as we start to process this data tonight, that's one of the things that we really want to get into. Last, yeah. The idea of racial, ethnic, cultural diversity, as well as diversity across other social identities, is really important to any school and crucial to making specifically BIPOC students and families feel welcome, seen, and heard. right? That idea that not only, there was a lot of sort of passionate conversations around wanting to be sure that you had not only adults in the building that looked like you, but if you were struggling with language as a student, that having other folks around you who also struggled with English and was important so that you didn't feel quite as embarrassed or quite as othered as you would in a school that didn't have that same level of representation. I think, again, sharing some of the concerns that you all had, this sort of really deep demand, if you will, for accountability, right? That there is a recognition from the folks that attended these sessions that there is a historical devaluing of BIPOC voices and a distrust of the processes. And so wanting to ensure, or there was a lot of questions around, how do we ensure that the ultimate approach does not sort of pit one group against the other, right? Benefit one group at the expense of the other group. And then, the folks that we heard from Creative Science, talked about, and I will say most of them, I won't say it was 100%, expressed a desire for their school to remain K-8, and that could be a vehicle to kind of achieving that diversity that they so richly want. And then on the other hand, I think that what we heard clearly from the Harrison Park communities was that they kind of had seemed to accept that the K-8 was going to transition to a K-5 middle school model. So kind of thinking about it in those terms.
Hi, Karina. You probably expected my voice right now. I still don't see the value of having this comment in there at all. It's clearly pitting two communities against each other with no actionable, right? Like a community wanting to stay a K-8 doesn't have any what do you do with that? Except for pit it against Harrison Park and say one school is okay with the changes and the other one is privileged. So I appreciate you rewording it and took the emphasis out, because clearly that wasn't a quote then. So I'm not sure where it came from. Well, but again, I think for you to say above, let's not pit two groups against each other. This last one says, let's pit these two groups against each other.
Well, and I guess, Josh, what we heard was definitely not trying to pit two groups against each other. It was just what we heard in one community was that there was a value placed, because of the desire to create diversity, on maintaining the K-8 model, and another group that said, we have enough diversity in our K-5 model that was not critical to us. So I don't think it was necessary. It certainly in those sessions wasn't a pitting of one community against the other. It was these communities have very different demographics. And so as we're trying to solve for the same thing, are different models a vehicle to getting there?
I think that's a very valid approach. I think this sentence, including on the other hand, is probably where it got loaded. So
okay. Yeah.
When you only have the materials that are emailed to you, that's what you have. So again, I'm trying to stay neutral and advocate for every community. But seeing a clear finger pointed, I'm going to call it out. So thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else have any questions about this before we start processing it in the group?
I actually do. When we're saying that one of the communities said we're diverse enough, what's the threshold, right? Like, what is the diversity ratios of students and families that determines what they think is diverse enough versus what PPS is saying needs to happen?
Yeah, I think, Adriel, what I'm hearing you ask is what we heard from primarily Harrison Park families is they felt that their school had a rich level of diversity. Jed, while I'm speaking, can you do me a favor and look up the demographics of the Harrison Park community so that way we can share that with the group? Because I don't think it wasn't coming from a quantitative place, Adriel. Like, people didn't come and say we are 26% Black and 40% Hispanic or Latinx. They just said, in our experiences, we feel as though there is a rich level of diversity at Harrison Park, and that's one of the things we love about it. That's why we as BIPOC families feel seen, feel heard, and feel celebrated, is what we heard, if that answers your question.
I mean, it does partially. So then I guess the other part is, so if a community is saying that, and you as a district know what the actual numbers are, right? And you are still lobbying to make those changes to increase diversity in the other community. How do you reconcile that, right? Like if the families, BIPOC and non-BIPOC, feel like there's a rich experience at Harrison Park, and the other school community is not, there's a lack of feeling that way from the other community, how do you reconcile disrupting the diverse community? Or is it the hope that diverse community will bleed into the new community and increase diversity? Because that may or may not be the case, but it's disrupting a settled community.
Yeah, and I think what the goal of this exercise was, and I guess Judy, maybe I'm going to look to you to see if I'm getting this wrong, is to hear from these communities such that it will shape, and part of the processing we're going to do tonight is to take this data so that way we can say to PPS, this is how we want this to impact the scenarios you created, right? So the response to that, Adriel, may be, we have to be very careful so that we don't disrupt communities that are already thriving, right? And are there other ways to achieve the same level of diversity that exists at Harrison Park, such that at least that aspect of it that is helping that school to thrive, even though it's a really small community. So one of the things that they recognize at Harrison Park is we have a rich, diverse experience in terms of culturally, but we don't have access to the same programs that they have at other schools because we don't have the same number of kids that we have here. And so there was kind of this duality that they presented to us of, like, we love the diversity of our school and we think that makes it really rich. We think that's one of the key sort of features of success, but we also feel like we don't have access to enough, and we are always the last to get resources, is what we heard from that community, right? So that, I think, is at the very crux of what you all as a Southeast Guiding Coalition are going to wrestle with. And how do you, I don't think that there is, I don't believe, and I don't want to speak for the school district. So anyone from the school district that wants to speak up, please, I welcome you to do that. I don't think there is any predetermined path forward that says we're going to break up these communities at this point, if that makes sense, Adriel. And Jed, I don't know if you have those numbers.
I'm also willing to speak up.
Go ahead, Claire.
That'd be helpful. So the importance of hearing from our BIPOC families is to help us understand from their perspective what they are experiencing and what they're hoping from in this process. And so while we, as we listen to more and more folks, we'll find that there's very different thinking in different communities, and sometimes there's very alike thinking in different communities. And we just want to have the thoughts of others in our mind, as we're also, if we're representing a school community, we're also making sure that we're listening to the other school communities so that we can find the best possible solution. It's not like there is a specific number that we're looking for at specific schools. We just want to take in what people's hopes are and what the charge is from our board, and then come up with the best solution for the region. So I hope that helps describe it a little bit.
Yeah. So thank you, Jed, for putting that information in the chat. Go ahead, Adriel.
So is there a scenario where there's sort of a pivot away from changing Harrison Park at all and just offering up additional resources? And I mean, is that an option, or are we squarely, sorry, my ice maker. Are we squarely fixed on moving down this direction and just trying to make the best possible experience, right?
So our board charge was to create a Harrison Park Middle School and increase Lent Middle School enrollment. And so there's a 6-8 program conversion that's happening across the district in our comprehensive neighborhood schools, but not necessarily in our focus option schools, which is what creative science is. So the intent of the board is to create a really strong middle school program. And I don't know if Margaret Calvert, who's responsible for middle schools, and then also I think Misha is in the room, who's working with the middle school programs, could share a little bit about the instructional program there. That would be really helpful for middle schools.
Okay, go ahead, Margaret, you're on mute. hold, please.
I also said Lent, and I think I meant Lane. Sorry.
So I want to, if Misha is here, I think she has probably some direct experience to speak to. Is me, and then I can follow up, Misha, if you want to go first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Sorry, my camera's not working. So it's been kind of glitchy, but for middle school, I think the idea and hope is that we can have a more comprehensive approach, providing electives and programming that are the same or equivalent to being the same across the board. Right now, there are discrepancies between the K-8s and our middle schools. And I think Kristen Westball can also speak towards it as well, and she's here. And Kristen, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think that the benefits of K-8 is that kids get to know each other and the educators that are supporting them really well. And at middle school, that can also be true, but there's more opportunity for more electives and kind of a broader program at comprehensive middle schools, which sometimes is a challenge at K-8. And so there are some trade-offs. And so trying to make sure that all students have access to a really good program with all of the options and also strong relationships is really important.
Thank you.
Along those lines, CSS says a K-8 is a constructivist school, which is this fantastic curriculum that runs all the way up through 8th grade. Whereas breaking that up, is different than breaking up a K-8 on standardized learning. Is that being taken into account, or is CSS focus option when it's inconvenient and a K-8 standard when it's convenient?
So we'll be bringing forward some information about what our instructional leaders are recommending, both for DLI and for our focus option. And certainly the focus option has, it's more a specific program for that school and has a different perspective than when we have our comprehensive neighborhood schools. So, and I'm again not the expert in that arena, but I'm trying to give the sentiment of what the charge from the board.
And thank you. And if I could can people hear me? Is my mic working again? Okay, thanks. So there are a couple of things as we go through, and it's, I think, thinking through, so there is, what is the instructional core that we're looking at, and that often shows up as programming, right? So like, what are the specific courses that we are, what is the portfolio of courses that are happening within schools? They look different in K-8s than they do in middle schools at times. And where is there a trade-off between, to Kristen's point, of what are the strengths of K-8s? What are the instructional pieces? To your point, also, Josh, like, is there an instructional focus that then is infused throughout a focus school that that is grown throughout a K-8, and how is that the same or different than a middle school experience? Some of that's determined by size of program too, then, which means the number of students, right? And so thinking about the portfolio of options, and also hearing people say that how do we balance that with proximity, right? Like, it's a very common thing that we hear between K-8s, elementary and middle school programming. And so I think that's part of what we're trying to strike a balance with. And we're very excited to hear people's thoughts and feedbacks about those specific things, and how do we balance those, and what does that look like?
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. And actually, the kind of conversation that we're getting into here is exactly what the kind of conversation we want to go into with our breakout rooms, right? So the question, and Megan, if you'll put this in the chat, we're about to go into 3 breakout rooms. And then after we do that, we will, but before we do a debrief, we'll do a break. So you're probably about 20 minutes from a break. But by all means, if you need to step away for a moment, please do. And really what we want you all to do, we'll do it the same way that we did last time, is to go into our 3 breakout rooms. So that way we can have more sort of intimate conversation in terms of the members of the Southeast Guiding Coalition around this central question. How should the information presented from listening and learning impact the development of scenarios? So remember, we were intentional about wanting to ensure that we foregrounded the listening and learning and the feedback, and your feedback as the Southeast Guiding Coalition, before we started to create in earnest and roll out scenarios, because we wanted to see how those influenced the scenarios, right? And so that's what we want you all to wrestle with tonight. These exact comments, these exact conversations that we're having here as a whole group, we want to have in these breakout groups. So with that, I think Marnie is going to push us into 3 breakout rooms. Each room will have a facilitator and a note taker. The facilitators will be part of the BRIC team. So Marnie, Elisa, and myself, we will be sharing our screen, and we will be kind of focusing around not just the listening and learning themes, but we'll spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes kind of taking a gallery walk of some of the quotes that you read. If you read the packet that Megan sent out, that we heard from these listening and learning sessions. So we will see you all in the breakout rooms, and then Marnie will set us a timer for 20 minutes to come back and talk about that together.
Okay, 20 minutes will go. So this is a little pivot, note takers. There'll be more note taking than we thought. We okay with that? Okay, I'm gonna send us off. There we go.
What we wanted to do, now that we've kind of had our time in the breakout rooms, is to have folks from the breakout rooms kind of share back a little bit of what we heard, right? Kind of how that worked. So I think that is where we're going to go, is maybe because I am facilitating, that means I get to not pick my room first. So Marnie, will you share from your group what we're kind of and if you want to share screen, Marnie, and kind of walk people to your group. Sorry, I'm asking you to walk and chew gum at the same time here.
Sure. So I felt some overwhelm. This is a very, very difficult task and question, and I heard a lot of grappling with that. So how can you possibly do this, and everyone should have this? So how do you translate that? That is the problem. So we did hear some ideas about making sure that any decisions made, any moves made, are tied directly to these themes. As we left, I was asking, how do you ensure people feel heard? How do you make them know that they were heard? If you're in an interpersonal relationship, how do you talk to someone and let them know that you're hearing them? So that is the task. What do? You can One idea was tie it directly to them. One idea was maybe this isn't a quick fix. Maybe this isn't an all at once sort of a thing. Maybe it's a couple of step process. Maybe, yeah, it's not quick and easy. One person said you build the fort first and then you show them that you can't just shove people around and tell them it's better. A lot of talk about that this is just should be everywhere, and that the entire PPS should be meeting all of these themes. Is there anyone from my room who would like to go further? Did I miss anything?
Anyone from Marnie's room? Okay.
How about if I keep sharing and I'll move?
Yeah, will you pull people to Columbia? Yeah, Elisa?
Yeah. So I think one big theme from our discussion was that there was a sense of frustration that, we didn't receive more feedback during listening and learning, and that, they're wondering if there was an opportunity to still hear more, and whether that's in the form of sessions. Now, the COVID situation is always changing and there's a recognition of the challenges there, but just really wanting to hear more voices, and just, some frustration over the fact that there's recognition that we do have this hard deadline that we're facing, but at the same time, feeling like we want to get this right. There was talk about, the fact that the distrust of the process amongst many BIPOC community members. And Josh brought up he was involved in, I guess, kind of a similar process several years back, and was looking at a document and saw that there was similar comments at that time. And so wondering, it just seems like this is sort of a habitual thing, and what can we do differently to kind of break that cycle and not make it so those communities are feeling left out of this process over and over. And then just a discussion of the feedback, some of the feedback from the sessions that stood out, that just changing the boundaries is not enough, that there has to be lasting change. There was discussion about, how one way we might kind of soften the impacts of this is to ensure that there are new programs and staffing, some of those things that touch upon other areas of the district. So, whether it's, including liaisons or after school programs or electives or different resources to just ensuring that there was that equitable experience across schools. Anyone else want to chime in from my group? Josh or Adriel or anyone? Okay, not seeing anyone else chime in. So I will talk about what we heard. I mean, very similar. So specifically, some process that was, or the concern that was expressed was that we didn't hear a lot from lane families, right? And I, as someone that attended all of these sessions, I would say that is true. We did not have hardly any representation from lane families. Despite a similar amount of effort to get them into these sessions. Similarly, there were folks in our group that had reported, or there was someone that reported that they had concerns that Woodstock wasn't being heard, that, both in the building and then as part of this process that their concerns weren't being heard. And so, that same desire to create opportunities at multiple places to, for especially BIPOC folks in impacted schools or affected schools to be heard. And so I think we can talk a little bit about some of the strategies we've developed for that. But, I think we as the facilitators share that same concern. And so we are looking for every opportunity, and I know the district is as well, to get folks together to talk about this. And so the hope is that as we start to roll out these scenarios and we get the opportunity to get that input, that people will have something to react to. And so they'll be able to kind of give us their feedback. And so I think the other thing that my group talked a lot about was acknowledging the contradiction even in the data that we did hear, right? And really acknowledging that because of that contradiction, there is a potential that we are going to further enforce the distrust of folks with PPS, because you're not going to be able to please everyone. And so people will say, well, there you go. One group will always say, well, there you go, you didn't hear me, right? And so what our group spent a lot of time talking about was, that there's really no way to avoid the hard work here. And what we have to do is, as we, as a Southeast Guiding Coalition, and certainly as the district is developing these scenarios alongside us, is to ensure that we are holding true to the values that we set, that were part of the district's charter and part of the conversations that you all have been having about what are the important things, the same kind of markers that are important for us to kind of use as our lens through that, right? And then we need to be very clear and articulate and have us as a Southeast Guiding Coalition, as we roll these scenarios out, not only roll them out, but roll them out in the context of, here is what we heard, and so here is how we tried to address that in this scenario. There was a real clear desire to make sure that that messaging was clear as we rolled it out. Kathleen, I don't know that I captured everything. Let me know. Anyone else in the group? There was anything that I missed in our discussions? Feel as though people's microphones aren't working tonight. Okay. So thank you, everybody. So, we talked about, and actually in our group, one of the things we talked about is that we're kind of balancing these two exercises. One is very much qualitative about the human experience, and the other is all about the numbers, right? And so even in this meeting, we're going to be doing that. We just spent a lot of time digesting information, digesting kind of human feedback. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the numbers that will also inform this process. And so to lead us through that, I think Jed is going to do an introduction, and then we get to go back into our breakout groups to kind of process some of the numbers as well.
Do you want to share a screen, Jed?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. Thank you. Okay, so another piece of material that came out ahead of the meeting here was an enrollment update. And so this is a snapshot in time from a little bit ago, September 29th, and this is to tee up our second small group discussion. And so just to describe what you're seeing here, the columns across the top show last year's official counts of enrollment, this year's preliminary count, the forecast that we've been working from for this year, differences between this year's preliminary and the forecast, and you see it both in counts and in percentages. And then we have the percent of students who are direct certified for free meals or other income-based assistance. And so what I wanted to just highlight are a few things that we're seeing here just in this data, the snapshot here. So first thing is that the COVID rebound anticipated in the forecast, particularly for elementary, that has not yet materialized fully. The second piece here is that middle schoolers are also short of the forecast, but you're seeing less so here. And comparatively there, elementary is 12% down from what we expected with the forecast. And you see that middle school here is 5.4% down from what we expected. And I just want to point out Kellogg here. And note that the new school effect that we were expecting to see and was included in the forecast has really been dampened by this slow rebound that we've seen even at the middle school level. And then sort of interestingly, we're actually seeing high schoolers coming back in greater numbers than were forecasted, particularly at McDaniel. And so the reason that I wanted to include direct certification here, which again is a poverty indicator, I wanted to highlight that there's just we're seeing a loose connection here between affluence and the number of students that are returning to school. So more affluent families, they appear to be taking advantage of other education options. And you're seeing just fewer students coming back yet so far. I would say that, Whitman, Arleta, and Vestal are sort of breaking that pattern from a percentage and a little bit less so from a strict magnitude standpoint. And that for Kelly, we actually looked into those numbers a little bit more detailed, knowing that there's a Russian DLI program there, and that's actually accounting for the vast majority of the students that have not shown up that were forecasted to. And so I think the upshot here is that we don't know when or how many of these students will return. But for our modeling purposes, as we move forward, we'll take a conservative approach here by using the forecasts, which are again a little bit higher than what we're seeing, just to ensure that schools are not overloaded. But I want to point out a caveat here, which is, that we need to keep an eye on any low enrollment schools that may struggle to sustain sections if those students don't come back. So I just think having an awareness around what we see with some of these patterns, particularly at the elementary level, where we're not seeing students come back yet, will be helpful for folks to be able to key into those issues if we do see them potentially showing up in the scenarios that come forward. And so that's what I've got to share here with context around this piece here. And again, just a snapshot. This is a document that's somewhat ephemeral. We'll get more official counts a little bit later on here, but just wanted to let folks know where we're at right now.
Yeah. Hey, Jed, just for everyone's kind of edification, will you talk a little bit about kind of how those official counts kind of come in and when you kind of create or when you feel like you've got the best data, because I know that this is preliminary?
Yeah, and I might kick it over to Judy as our enrollment director to have the official word on this, but we're expecting to get that in November. But Judy, anything more to say?
Yeah, so we've got our official October counts happening this week. That tells us about the enrollment of students in the school, but there's still cleanup to be done to make sure that we have accurate addressing and we understand some critical information for a process like this, like where do kids live, not just where do they attend, but what's their neighborhood school, and it helps us with all of the factors around distance to schools, et cetera. So those updates will be available in this process around mid-November. And what that means is that we're going to start talking about change and evaluating scenarios based on the feedback that you've been already receiving, and then going out and doing more listening and learning with preliminary data. And so just to emphasize what Jed was sharing a minute ago, as we think about the best method for the next few weeks, we've agreed that we're going to continue to use the forecast data that we had from last year that assumed more of a bounce. So we're going to be conservative and assume that there will be sort of more kids filling the buildings than what we're actually seeing right now. We could be seeing those kids back in school before the end of this year. We might not see them. There's just a lot we don't know, but we will try and be as clear with you as we can. And we really welcome you to let us know the kind of explanation that that would help not just you, but all the other stakeholders who are going to be paying attention for the next little while, so that these kinds of questions don't sideline the really good and rich discussion about the impact of change. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. That was helpful. All right, does anyone have any questions about, not necessarily the processing, but any questions about the data that Jed presented? So, because I know that Megan is trying to address the access issues with that document, I'm going to put in the chat the 3 questions that we want you to address in your breakout room as it relates to the numbers that you saw. So what enrollment issues are you aware of at your child's school? Which students are impacted? And how does this shape your thinking about enrollment and program balancing? So I believe, Marnie, you're going to push us back into breakout rooms for about 20 minutes.
And we have this data in the Miro board.
Every Miro board will have this data in it. And we will again just have some conversations and process the numbers part, not just the people part. Okay. Thank you, Marnie.
Off you go.
Welcome back. So we're going to do the same thing, kind of going to process this data, the conversations that were had about the data in each of the rooms. I'm going to, okay. And I just saw, actually, I think Megan just posted, the link should be fixed now. The hope is, let us know. The link to that raw data should be working, and it is in the chat. So try it again and let us know in the chat if you still can't have access. Yes, it sounds like we're getting some numbers in the right direction, so, or at least some thumbs up. Okay, why don't you do Columbia room first? Oh, I'll go ahead and do, you're at Clackamas, so I'll just go ahead and do it. You're already there. So, you know, we started off with kind of answering the first question around kind of what are you seeing in terms of enrollment. We had the benefit of some principals in our group, so talking about kind of the what we're calling is a small rebound, you know, in the last couple of weeks around folks starting to come back. There was a feeling, and it felt like this was true across the board, at least for the folks in our room, that the DLI programs have seemed to have kind of had high loss numbers, right? There are greater numbers of folks who are choosing to either teach kids in pods or go to online learning as part of that program. Some of that driven by just, you know, the program itself, and some of it, quite frankly, in some communities driven by some Asian hate in their communities that make people feel unsafe to return to in-person learning. I think some of the other things that we heard, I think we heard very clearly from folks around there are a lot of rumors out there in the community, especially around kind of the future fate of creative science, and so that may be impacting enrollment and lottery. There were some conversations around the Kellogg numbers, and really. Then we focused a lot on, it does not feel like we have, the data that we have is too limited. A real desire to see the enrollment data desegregated by race and ethnicity, by socioeconomic status, so SES, and also a concern to want to see how families with children with disability were being impacted by those numbers, and really, what are the communities with greatest barriers and in, you know, in this group, right? A recognition that amongst us as a Southeast Guiding Coalition, or at least certainly in the group that we were in,
the very folks that we're trying to talk about aren't represented in those rooms. And so wanting to kind of acknowledge that. And then I think the final point that we had was that, we need to pair the data with input from the instructional folks at PPS about the impacts of these scenarios to educational outcomes, right? It feels like the numbers alone are hard to interpret without the folks who understand what the educational impacts are to kind of educate the group on that. So we'll be sure as we talk about the scenarios that is a huge component of it. Not only how are we trying to respond to the feedback that we've gotten, but then also what are the implications for teaching and learning. Anybody else in our group? Kathleen, did I miss anything?
I just wanted to add, I'm not sure if I missed this, but there was the comment also that talked about how people new to the process are having some challenges with due to the language, what I call educationese and acronyms that are embedded within this process.
Yeah, not only that, but not only the language, but just folks that joining as part of phase 2 are really not connected. They don't have the context from phase 1. And so some of them are struggling. And the statement was, if I'm having a hard time understanding the language and the acronyms, can you imagine somebody that's going to have to try and process the scenario for themselves? So kind of a desire to create a glossary, if you will, as part of this work moving forward. Okay. Now, I think we are on to Columbia.
Regarding the first question, what enrollment issues are you aware of at your child's school? There was a kind of a discussion acknowledgement that that parents right now might not have a lot of awareness about how the current schools are being used because, well, first, students have been sort of in and out of school with COVID, and parents haven't really been allowed in the buildings in the same way that they were, during different times. And so there isn't a strong awareness right now about some of the issues that might be related, to overcrowding amongst a lot of families. Talked about maybe, some of the limits of the data just based on the timing. And also wondering if, when the vaccine is approved for kids under 12, if that would result in enrollment surges, right? That would be closer to what was anticipated, or maybe even exceeding what was anticipated. Talked about how it would be helpful to know how many, when we see the enrollment levels less than what was expected, how many families opted out kind of versus moved away. That, there have been a lot of COVID related relocations where people have moved out of the city. Around Harrison Park in particular, there's a lot of rentals. So wanting to understand if the permanence of some of those patterns. And then also discussion about, some information that would be helpful to know, how it'd be helpful to be able to pair some of this information with capacity, and then also to keep in mind the district's plans in modernizing schools and what that schedule would be, and students that might have to go to swing sites in coming years, and so how that would impact the number of transitions that they might face, knowing that that's in the future. And trying to think if I forgot anything. Anyone else want to chime in from my group?
We did talk a little bit about how that how the enrollment numbers translate into class sizes. So both grade level cohorts, how many strands or classrooms at each grade level we might be talking about, and how just an overall enrollment number doesn't really give you an idea of how many kids there might be in a classroom. So maybe further aggregated to grade level and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, thank you, Beth. And understanding we're going to have a chance to delve into the data in greater detail in the future, but yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Marnie, will you share with us the feedback from the Willamette group?
We have Sam to share out.
Oh, perfect. Sam, will you share with us, please?
Volunteered.
Perfect. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Yes, let's see. Just to focus on the question of, I guess, individual schools for starters, I was just sort of looking at the differential and just trying to analyze that as relates to where people fell. And yeah, I just said my school seemed average as it relates to the drop. You know, you could average it out to a few kids per grade. And of course, there's many individual stories that may lead to why those enrollment numbers are down. So I didn't speculate on the reasons why. There seems to be stable enrollment in Atkinson immersion. Woodstock numbers seem pretty high compared to other schools, but like other people have said, what's missing there is like capacity and average classroom size. And maybe we got not hung up is the wrong word, but we talked a little bit about like, are you a negative number? Are you a positive number? Are you green? Are you red? Is PPS looking at that as good or bad? Is there a success metric attached to any of that? It might be better to look at pre-pandemic data. A lot of talk about the same DLI schools contributing to large drops in enrollment. And again, the same sort of talk about what does the future state of the country look like going forward as it relates to those trends? Is it just a drop due to a pandemic? Are people reevaluating the way they seek education? But definitely, as you can see by these post-its, a lot of sort of, it would be nice to be able to see the school classroom size as it relates to this data. Perhaps sometimes that's a good thing. Kellogg theaters, why would people choose an overcrowded school? And so, yeah, I guess that was a lot of what we talked about in our particular group was the relationship of this data to the decisions that we make and some of the reasons why enrollment might be affected. Again, the issue of as we change schools to K-5 and middle school programs, does that sort of antiquate this data a little bit and do performance measures and whatnot look different as we shift to a different education model in the first place anyway? So I think, not to belabor much people's time, but I think that's essentially it.
Thank you, Sam. Anybody else from the Willamette group? Thank you, Arnie, for giving me the zoom in, zoom out. Okay. Well, that was a lot of processing tonight. You know, I think our main goal in doing that processing was, again, just to figure out partly what more do you need from the data, which I think we got good feedback on tonight, and any sort of advice, if you will, that you would give to the district as they were using this data to start to create the preliminary scenarios that we'll start to roll out between this meeting and next meeting. So with that, I think, Esther, we go to you for our closing comments.
I want to seize this opportunity to thank everyone for participating. I hope that you benefited immensely from the small group, small breakout sessions, and that you were able to glean ideas and suggestions and at least have some thoughts around the big rocks that we have to move. We all agree that this is going to be a very challenging task, but we all agree also that it is a very necessary task. The other piece of it is, while we may not get everything we want, I am sure that in the interest of students, if we keep our students centered, we can do what's best for our kids, even though we may not be perfect. So in closing, and on behalf of district leadership tonight, I do want to thank you again for your willingness to collaborate around very challenging issues. We look forward to balancing enrollment, looking at our program options to address inequities. We look forward to having a home for our K-5 students at Harrison Park and also increasing the enrollment at Lane in the near future. In the interim, I do want to just admonish everyone to continue to review our plans, continue also to think about the discussions that we've had tonight, and continue to support us through the Southeast Guiding Coalition meeting. If you get home tonight or maybe tomorrow morning as you reflect on the conversations and the discussions that have occurred tonight, if there's anything that you felt that you didn't get an opportunity to share, please feel free to email, to call. We will take the information into consideration and make sure that we share it with the group. Please complete the feedback form before you leave. Your input is of great value to us. It helps us to shape our meetings. It also helps us to revise our plans to make sure that we are meeting your needs. Additionally, we are looking forward at discussing or continuing our conversations about our boundary shifts, about our DLI programs and our focus option programs. Our next meeting will take place on the 21st of October. In that meeting, we will receive scenarios to address the enrollment issues so that we can we can continue the conversations that we started tonight. We will also have a virtual Saturday work session on the 23rd of October from 10 to 3 p.m. There will be an invitation sent out, and if participants are willing to join, we would really appreciate your presence. We will continue to discuss fall enrollment counts and potential impacts. As we all know, this is hopefully, this is an anomaly for this year, and that next year things will normalize. We're really keeping our fingers crossed in light of the pandemic that seems to be dragging on longer than anybody expected. So again, on that note, I do want to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for participating in the discussions. We've, of course, captured notes, ideas, and information that you've provided. And stay safe, drive home safely, and the meeting is adjourned.
Now, Esther, before we formally close the meeting, so thank you, everyone. Marnie's just going to do a quick checkout to allow people to give us their parting thoughts. So go ahead, Marnie.
Just again, like we brought our voices into the room, we will take them out. And I loved what Esther said about these are big rocks that you're moving and carrying. And so maybe in a two breath or 2-word checkout in the chat, what's the biggest rock that you feel from this? What's the heaviest rock going forward? And then maybe we'll have a couple of you share out, just a quick share out. And just go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to. If the rock came to you immediately, just unmute and share.
Yeah, exactly. I encourage you all to think about this and give us some feedback in the chat of what's the heaviest burden you're carrying with you heard today? What's the biggest rock? See the typing hands, Marnie. So people are going to give us good feedback here.
Yeah, we want to earn trust, but there's so much uncertainty. This is a giant task you are tasked with and you have picked up, and it's honorable and an honor to be witnessing it with you all.
Again, please remember to complete your exit tickets and give us your input. It is of great value to us.
It is. It allows us to figure out what more you need from us. So please, I think you're exactly right, Esther. All right, everyone. Again, thank you for your time. Encourage you to continue in the last maybe minute or so to give us any thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I think a real reckoning that there is no grand solution to this, right? But that there will be many hard solutions, and that at the end of the day, and I'm going to go back to kind of where you started us, Leah, that these aren't just impacting numbers; they are impacting people and the heaviness that brings with it. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Be well. See you on the 21st.